Chapter 13. Peg slowly climbed to her feet. If James had gone with Quantrill's raiders, then by now he should be in Arkansas, on his way to Texas. What was he doing there? Dressed in farmer's homespun, with broad-brimmed felt hat pulled low over his eyes. Danny's partial description of the man he'd seen riding with Mr. Parker flashed in Peg's mind. No beard or mustache, and had Danny been about to say long curly hair? Danny! Peg suddenly woke up to the fact that she was shivering in the alley, when she could be following James as Danny would want her to. James' big boots carried him well into the alley. So Peg took that route too, this time quietly and carefully picking her way over and around the rubble, much of it hidden by the late afternoon's deep shadows. She was close to the next street when she heard a voice. She looked up and saw that James was still inside the alley, nearly hidden in the dim light, and with him was a woman. Her heart pounding, her throat tight with fear and hurt, Peg huddled against the wall. Although she couldn't see the woman clearly, Peg knew she had to be Miss Hennessy. Who else would James meet secretly? And if this was Miss Hennessy, then everything she had told Peg was a lie, and Peg had believed it. Peg's heartache slid into anger, and she stepped out boldly, ready to confront Miss Hennessy. But the couple had left, and the alley was empty. Bloody, torn stockings or not, Peg marched furiously into the street and down the block to Mrs. Kling's boarding house. May I see Miss Hennessy? Peg asked Miss Kling as she opened the door. Why, you're the little girl who visited her before, Mrs. Kling said, and held the door open wide. But she took in Peg's appearance immediately, and her smile changed to a look of concern. Whatever in the world happened to you? She asked, automatically bending to brush the dirt off Peg's coat. I fell on the cobblestones, Peg answered. My. Will you look at those knees? You're needing some cool water and a cloth to clean those scrapes. Maybe Miss Hennessy, Peg began, but Mrs. Kling was already leading Peg up the stairs and down the hall to the third room on the right. Mrs. Kling knocked on the door, waited for an answer, then knocked again. Apparently Miss Hennessy is not at home, she said. If you'd like, you may wait for her in the parlor. Peg tugged at her skirts, her face pink with embarrassment at the thought of her skinned knees on exhibit for anyone who would come into the parlor. Please, ma'am, the state of my stockings are in. Could I wait in Miss Hennessy's room instead? From her pocket, Miss Kling pulled a round gold watch on a chain, glanced and said, Supper will be served in 15 minutes, so Miss Hennessy should arrive home any minute now. I suppose that under the circumstances, there's nothing wrong with allowing you to wait in her room. She opened the door, sailed inside with a swish of skirts, and lit the oil lamp on the nearest table. Sit down, dear, and do tend to those knees as soon as possible. Out of the door, Mrs. Kling swept, closing it firmly behind her. Peg studied the room. It was neat and tidy, with lacy curtains and 2 floral prints on the bed. A puffy patchwork quilt covered the bed, and a wardrobe stood against the far wall. Unable to resist the temptation, Peg opened the wardrobe doors wide and peered inside, and there hung a dull gray dress Miss Hennessy had worn when she stayed at their house, and the traveling suit she had worn to visit her sister, and there were 2 beautiful dresses in velvet and silk hanging next to them. Peg stroked the soft fabric and wondered where Miss Hennessy could possibly wear such elegant dresses. 2 carpet bags were against the wall behind the wardrobe. Peg quickly closed the wardrobe doors and opened the bags. The small one was completely empty, the clothing inside probably transferred to the chest of drawers, but the bottom layer of one contained printed leaflets. Peg picked one up and saw an advertisement of a play that had been performed at a theater in St. Louis. Another was from a theater in New York. On both leaflets was a sketch of a beautiful dark-haired woman who could be no one else but Miss Hennessy. But the printed name of the actress under the picture was Elise Morgan. Stunned, shaken, unable to comprehend what she had discovered, Peg stared at the edge of the bed and plopped down. Who was Elsie Morgan? Who was Violet Hennessy? Ma would have a fit if she knew Miss Hennessy was an actress, and surely Mrs. Kling didn't know either. No respectable landlady of a boarding house would rent a room to an actress. Actresses were, well, Peg wasn't exactly sure why actresses were shunned by other women, but she remembered the painted lady she'd seen in the hotel when she and Danny were there with Olga and Alfred, and she'd heard comments about actresses being loose women, whatever a loose woman was. As the door suddenly opened behind her, Peg startled and jumped to her feet. For just an instant, Miss Hennessy stared at Peg with wide eyes, and then she silently closed the door and crossed the room. She took the leaflets from Peg's hands and returned them to the carpet bag and snapped it shut. Although she was frightened, Peg asked, Who are you? As you've discovered, Miss Hennessy said, I'm an actress. Are you Violet Hennessy or Elsie Morgan? Does it matter? Yes, of course it matters. Why? Do you like me any less because you learned about my profession? Peg's cheeks grew warm as anger flushed through her body. I don't have to explain, she insisted. You do. Miss Hennessy removed her coat and hat and sat on a small, slat-backed rocker. Calmly, she said, Are you aware that most people look down on their well-bred noses at actresses? It's a popular conception that we're not as moral as other women. Peg nodded, not quite sure what Miss Hennessy meant. I hope you won't inform your mother or Mrs. Kling of my profession. I hope that for a little while this can be our secret, Peg. Our secret, Peg exploded. How many times have you asked me to keep your secrets? I ask only because we're friends. If we were friends, we'd tell each other the truth. Oh, do you think we've been untruthful with each other? No. Yes. No, I mean, I haven't been the one who's hidden things, but you have. You've lied to me and to Ma over and over again. Peg dropped to the bed again, her angry outburst draining her energy. If that's what you believe, what can I possibly say that will change the situation? Miss Hennessy asked. She pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve and dabbed at her eyes. You could tell me the truth, Peg said, not for one moment believing that Miss Hennessy's tears were real. Are you a Confederate spy? She shivered as she spoke. The word spy soured in her mouth and slammed against her ears. What reason could you possibly have to suspect me of treason? There you go again, Peg cried in frustration. You answer my question with other questions. You don't give me the answers I want. And exactly what do you want? I told you, I want the truth. I saw you with James in the alley, and I think James is the man who rode home with Mrs. Parker when he was injured. Danny thinks Mr. Parker is the one who told Quantrill that the Union General's wagon train was coming, so Quantrill would attack it. She took a long breath and ended in a sob. And she said, Danny wants to tell the Union authorities, so I begged him not to. I told him you were my friend, and I believed in you. But I don't anymore. Now I wish I told him to go ahead and tell. I've hurt you, Miss Hennessy said. I truly didn't mean to hurt you. She held out a hand, but Peg refused to take it. Chimes sounded from the foot of the stairs, signaling supper was about to be served. Peg stood ready to leave, and Miss Hennessy waved her back. Please stay. Supper isn't important, Peg. You're important. I'll answer your questions truthfully, I promise. Slowly, Peg sat down, even though she seriously doubted Miss Hennessy's promises and truthfulness. However, I must ask you in return, Miss Hennessy said, to not reveal what I'm about to tell you. Well, I can't promise that, Peg said, when I don't know what you're going to say. I'm tired of lies and secrets, and I can't hide information that would aid the enemy and hurt the Union. Miss Hennessy thought for a long moment, and then said, I understand, and you're right to feel the way you do. I'll tell you what I can, and then you'll know why the information must be kept a secret. Fair enough, Peg answered. She folded her arms tightly across her chest and prepared to listen. Give me a moment, please, Miss Hennessy said. She splashed cold water on her eyes and patted her face with a linen towel that hung next to the wash basin and pitcher, and went downstairs to inform Mrs. Kling she would not be having supper. When she returned, she sat again on the rocker. My stage name is Elsie Morgan. My true name is Violet Morgan Hennessy. Nellie and Louise Parker are my sister and brother-in-law. James is not my cousin. James is one of Quantrill's raiders. He rode with Quantrill for a while. He's a Confederate. Let's not talk of James right now. Let me explain something about myself. I am a spy, but not a Confederate spy. I work with a respected Union officer in collecting information that will help our Union Army. Is the officer here in St. Joseph? No, but he's within traveling distance. Why do you have to travel? Why can't you give the information to one of the officers in St. Joseph? If my work is to be effective, only one man must know who I am. I must be able to trust him, and he must be able to trust me. The Union officers in St. Joseph don't know me, and must not know about me. If my identity were well known, the Confederates would soon learn of it too, and then my work would be useless. Peg was insistent. James was with Quantrill. Miss Hennessy closed her eyes as though she were exhausted. When she opened them, she said, I learned from James the route of Quantrill and his men would take to their ride to Texas. I later learned about General Blunt's move from Fort Scott to Fort Gibson. I realized the danger Blunt and his company would be in if they crossed the pass of Quantrill. It would take time to get the information to General Blunt, and I was frantic. I knew I'd be meeting up with the Union Army patrols. I couldn't afford to be stopped and questioned. It was a chance that I met your sister Frances. However, when I learned from her that your brother Danny lived, I knew that the area would be ideal for Nellie and Louis. You'd want the opportunity to see Danny, and if I had a child riding with me on the trip, I likely would not be questioned. As Miss Hennessy paused, Peg squeezed her eyes shut in agony. You planned all this before we even met? I thought you invited me to travel with you because you wanted my company. I did enjoy your company, Peg. Hurting, Peg hugged her shoulders. I was just someone to be there, for things to be easier for you. You don't care how you used me. I do care about you, Peg, believe me, but I also care about saving the lives of hundreds of men. That has to come first. Peg tried to gulp down the lump that tightened her throat. Then you went to the Parker's house, and I was kept outside, and you gave the message to Mr. Parker, didn't you? Yes. Louis was to carry it to General Blunt, but Louis was shot by a bushwhacker who tried to kill and rob him. He didn't get to General Blunt. That's why you were so sad, wasn't it? Yes, it was a terrible thing that we had failed. Peg thought again about the first meeting with the Parkers. You only pretended you hadn't seen your sister for 5 years, didn't you? That's correct. Nellie and I have worked together for the Union since my husband Daniel Hennessy was killed during the first year of the war. Women spies are not shot or hung when they're caught, so Nellie and I made the decision to work together to help our Union forces. What about Mr. Parker? Louis is very brave. He had been wounded in battle and sent home. When he recovered, he insisted on joining Nellie and me. Peg couldn't resist asking, what might happen to you if you someday were caught? Miss Hennessy sighed as she said, I was captured once in Arkansas, imprisoned by the Confederates, but my jail was poorly constructed frame building, and I was able to loosen some boards and escape. I made my way to Kansas and was almost caught again in the Lawrence Massacre. Oh, Peg gasped as the thought struck her. Frances brought you to her house. Does she know? No, Miss Hennessy answered. You're the only one in whom I've confided. She stood and walked to the window, holding aside the lace curtains, so she could look out on the streets. For a few minutes, neither she nor Peg spoke, and finally Miss Hennessy turned back to Peg, letting the curtain drop behind her. I'll leave St. Joseph in a short time. I'll make contact with a Union officer and give him the extremely important information I was sent here to learn. Did James give you the information? There's no need for you to know my source, she answered, as Peg tried to sort out all that she'd heard. Miss Hennessy said, you can see that my life, and Nellie's and Lewis's lives are in your hands. Don't say that, Peg insisted. That isn't fair. Miss Hennessy's eyes were deep and dark, her gaze intent on Peg's face. Fair? Hard to think about being fair. I've answered your questions truthfully, and I promise I'll never ask you to travel with me again. As I've told you, soon I'll leave St. Joseph, probably never to return. Her mind in torment, Peg studied Miss Hennessy. Like a little chameleon lizard Marcus had once caught and brought to school, its skin changed from brown to green and brown again. Miss Hennessy now was neither the beautiful, self-assured woman nor the timid, mousy woman Peg had known. She looked tired, frail, and so pitiful that in spite of her quandary, Peg's heart ached for her. Will you keep my secret? What's your answer, Peg? Miss Hennessy asked. Peg couldn't speak. She needed time to think. What could she answer?